There was something inside me that just was eating at me, thinking, this is not your future. This is not meant for you.
Nice. Okay, swing hard.
I've always been an athlete through my life. I played sports all growing up. And so I always felt like I was a very healthy, active person. I was a young mom, and my husband traveled a lot for work. And so managing the households while working full-time was pretty stressful. I also had just had 2 kids in less than 2 years. And so my body had experienced a lot of stress and trauma as well. There was a time in my life where, in the middle of this busyness of life, I started getting a really bad headache. I wasn't too worried for a while. Weeks went by and it still kind of lingered. We were at a family vacation in Yellowstone, and as we were driving through Yellowstone looking at all the beauty that was around, I noticed that my vision was getting blurrier and blurrier. I started to get a little bit worried. And so we did a little eye test that I failed terribly. And he said, yeah, it might be a good idea to consider getting an MRI. Anytime MRIs come into play, you're looking for something deeper. It's not anything that's surface level that can be fixed quickly. Reading the radiologist's report, when I saw the words multiple sclerosis, that was pretty telling. I just thought, there's no way. There's no way I have that. I was referred up to a neurologist. He ordered the additional testing just to make sure that that was the case, and then everything came back positive for MS. I just learned really quickly about the nature of MS, the story that's told, that my life was gonna look really different in the next 10 to 20 years. I asked him, what can I do? How does my lifestyle need to change to help support this diagnosis? And when he shared, there was absolutely nothing I could do. There was no diet, there was no lifestyle, there was nothing that was clinically proven to help patients with MS. That's when I think I started feeling the most discouraged. Like I had no control over what my future would bring me. And that's when, the sadness and the unknown really started to set in. Thinking about my young family. At that point, I had a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old, a boy and a girl, and just trying to understand how would I be able to fulfill my role as a mother for them, and how would I be able to fulfill my role as a wife for my husband. My mental health as a whole really took a big hit at that time. It was just so much unknown, and all you can rely on is your provider, who told me that I needed to go on what they call disease-modifying drugs, which for me looked like an infusion every 6 months. The second time I got the infusion, I remember feeling so sick after. The IV in my arm had to burst my blood vessel. I had so much pain. I just said, you know what? There's no way. I'm done. I just felt it so deep in my core of, I've got to take my health into my own hands. My husband and I went into full research mode, and we were determined to figure out what we can do, what is out there, and what is possible. We bought books, dug into diet. We were so desperate to find anything, and in turn, I was desperate to try anything. I just started with the food that I was eating and the environment that I was in. Can I help you? Exercise is so important with MS. One of the first things to go is your muscle strength and your ability to control your body in different ways. And so I knew early on that strength training was going to be really important. There was a point where I just, I knew my neurologist was maybe an important part of my healthcare team, but I decided that maybe there were other people that could be an important part of my healthcare team too. And so I explored functional medicine. One thing that we really recognized was diving into blood work. What did I need to make up for through my diet and through supplements and those types of things? You never really know how your brain is healing unless you have imaging to prove that your body is healing or getting worse. My neurologist called me in for an MRI. Prior to meeting with him, I looked at the results on my own, and I was shocked to read what he had to share. There was a small improvement in some of the lesions on my brain. I just felt like, man, I had just won the jackpot. You know, I was ready to celebrate with my neurologist. I just remember in that moment, he looked up at me and said, it was probably a mistake. You know, that's not possible. You know, we don't see improvement in lesions. You know, it must have been a misread from the radiologist. And I just sat in that moment with the most, torn feelings. Why is he not celebrating this big win with me? I just sat there and I was like, you know what? No, I'm not gonna go for this. I remember I scooped up my baby and I turned around and walked out, and I was like, I'm never coming back here. That's when I was more committed than ever. I was ready to prove to the whole world that healing from MS was possible.
We got this.
After I had my third child, I realized if I'm not going to be on disease-modifying drugs, then I at least need to be smart about what I'm doing. I ended up finding a neurologist that I went in and met with. I sat down with him and he said, I am blown away by the results of your MS. The lesions on your brain are significantly smaller. You had a lesion on your C-spine that was about this big, and now it's about this big. And there's really only a 2% chance of lesions ever healing in an MS patient. I almost can't even believe what I'm seeing. What have you been doing?
Cav, I know you have 3 counts.
I just kept pushing forward with the path that I was carving for myself. What I did 7 years ago to heal my body is different to what I'm doing today to support it. You have to trust yourself over time and listen to your body. I just think back to that young mom that I was. I'm just so grateful for her and for her courage and for her willingness to stand up for what felt right, to go against the grain of what healthcare really meant at that time. My husband and I really had to come together. He was amazing and so supportive. I couldn't have asked for a more supportive partner. Now, my family, we focus so much on diet and we focus so much on being active.
Big brother? Oh, no way!
If what your doctor is saying doesn't feel right as you sit and reflect on it, be willing to have the courage to find something that does support your body in a different way or does support your healing in a different way. If there's anything that I want my kids to know, it's how important it is that you take control of your health. Create your own journey.